Hello and welcome to another episode of Crime Scene to Screen, a spin-off podcast of the main We Need to Talk About Movies podcast. And for this episode, we are going to talk about the Parker Hulme murder case and the film that was inspired by those events, Heavenly Creatures, the Peter Jackson film of 1994. And for this episode, we decided to just mix things up a bit. But first of all, let me introduce my co-host as well as myself, because I always have a habit of not introducing myself. My name is
Always.
Joe.
Always.
Of course. And that lovely angelic voice you heard is the lovely Therese. So hello, Therese.
Hello, Joe. I am also a heavenly creature, but maybe not so much in the light of the two that we're talking about. And this episode 6, is an episode of firsts as well.
Oh, yes.
So it is our first case from New Zealand. It's our first case that focuses on females, and it is also our first guest. This is when you know you've made it, because you have a guest on your podcast.
Of course.
And we have the lovely Colette Fahy. Hello, Colette.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm in the US, so it's a little brighter over here, in case anyone's looking and thinking, I have a huge light shining into my apartment.
Whereas we don't. We've our lovely wee dank corners of, it's very indicative of Belfast housing. We love it.
Yeah.
But yes,
crime corners.
Oh, of course.
Crime corner.
So as we said, we just want to mix up a bit and start to bring in guests. So Colette, why did you decide to, through the vast list and the lovely spreadsheet Therese developed on, true crime cases, why did you choose Heavenly Creatures? What drew you to that one?
Yeah, I think I seen it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and when I saw it, I'm sure you'll have your reactions too. I thought wow, okay. I also, it always intrigued me because I had seen, everyone's seen Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. I'd also seen, what's the one with the monkey, Brain Dead, his kind of B-movie gore. And this is in between.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see, how he goes from really B-movie stuff all the way through this into Lord of the Rings. But just I think the story is amazing. The story is, I don't think I even knew it was a true story when I watched it. And then I only found out afterwards, and I don't know too much about the true story aspects. So I'm kind of interested to see what you've dug up. But most of the film isn't the murder. And it's just this incredible other world. So I love it. And it's a bit the last 10 minutes of it are quite oh my god, but the whole film just it just drew me. I just felt completely drawn into their world. So I love it. I think it's very different for a true crime film. It's not really about a serial killer going around offing people. It's very unique, I think.
Oh, definitely. And see, I hadn't seen it myself since, I didn't even actually see it as a whole. When I was younger, I watched bits and pieces of it, the stuff with the fourth world kind of creeped me out, and we'll get into that. But I knew when I watched it again, I was that's a very well made film. And of course, we're going to go into all that there. But before we do that, we have to talk about the case first. And in order to do that, I think you should lead the way here, Therese, and just get us going, get the ball rolling with the actual case that inspired the film.
Get the ball rolling and introduce the world to the two gals. Let me just lift my notes here, because I'm actually quite prepared this week. I've got notes, which includes headings. And one thing that me and you struggle with highly, Joe, is pronunciation. So I have things written down by syllables, so I don't make a dick out of myself.
That's why I gave you, the beginnings, because it talks about those difficult to say words.
It does.
Of course it does.
Thank you.
Whereas I would say something like sore leg, you're going to do the correct medical terminology. So let her rip. Let's hear about these lovely ladies.
Let's hope we do it proud. So we're going to start with the girl's background. So basically, Heavenly Creatures and the crime itself centers on two young girls, one named Pauline Yvonne Parker and the other called Juliette Hulme. Pauline's actual real name was Pauline Yvonne Reaper, But for reasons later on, we find out she goes by Parker. She's also referred to quite a lot in the film by her family and some of the transcripts and things as Yvonne. So to be honest, nobody really knew who she was, because she didn't know herself. But she was born on the 26th of May in 1938. So while at school, she met Juliette Hulme, who was originally from London, and this was whenever they were both in their early teens. So they both came from very opposite backgrounds. Pauline, very working class. Her dad was a fishmonger. The house that they lived in was also like a B&B. While Juliette, who arrived in 1948, was the daughter of a psychiatrist. Sorry, a physicist. See, that's a word
it's
that everybody knows.
It's the peas.
That's a word that everybody knows, and I've already said it wrong. She was the daughter of a physicist, who was also the rector of the local University of Canterbury in Christchurch. And I also believe that her mum was an actress, possibly, which is hinted to in the film. But yeah, two different backgrounds, and normally those things, opposites attract. Both girls become friends, and they really strangely become friends over their illnesses that they've had as children. So Pauline had, here we go, osteomyelitis.
Yep, that's it. I think I'm gonna read the word again. It sounds right.
Yep, and this is easy for enough. And Juliette had TB or tuberculosis. See, can't even say tuberculosis. See, no.
That's why you just said TB. TB.
Yeah, TB. So when they first met, this is what they initially bonded over. And as their friendship went on, they often really like romanticized the idea of the two of them being sick. One couldn't be sicker than the other, which is really weird. And both the osteo thing, which is I've said it once, I'm not going to say it again. It affects your bones and your legs, whereas TB, it's basically everything. So it's not as if they had something that was very minor. It was both real life-threatening diseases that the guards had, and they spent most of their childhood really unwell. They both met while attending Christchurch Girls' High School, and this is where their sort of bond and friendship came about. I'll leave it there because I think we need to have natural breaks here. And Joe, I'll let you come in and describe their beautiful blossoming relationship while at school.
Yes. Well, like you said, the two of them bonded over their illnesses and, romanticized the idea of it. It's like, oh, you're ill. Well, I'm ill as well. And all this here over dramatic, over imaginative sort of way of being. And that's sort of indicative of who they were. Like they both had really, wild and, sort of crazy imaginations. But you have to think about New Zealand at the time as well. It's a very relatively low population for the size. I think it was about 2 million. Very conservative sort of country and background around the time in the 1950s. So essentially there wasn't a lot to do. So they sort of created their own ideas, and they were both big into writing and artwork, particularly with sculpture work. So that's another thing they sort of bonded over, but it reached another level when they were developing their writing together, that they created this idea known as the fourth world. Now, the fourth world was essentially their idea of heaven. And I think in the film, I think it's Pauline, it's like, I'm not sure if it's Pauline or Juliette who says, it's like heaven without the Christians. Juliette does. Yes, that's right. And I think that is true. Like that's something Juliette actually did say about it. And essentially within the fourth world, it was their idea of heaven, and it's somewhere they could only access twice a year, and it could only be reached when they reached like a weird sort of spiritual ecstasy together. It was very strange, how deep and obsessive they were about the idea of it. And, within this world, they renamed themselves as Gina and Deborah. And within the world, they sort of had all these, real life people, but it's the sort of romanticized ideas of them, in terms of actors at the time. Like, I think James Mason was someone, and Orson Welles, and there was a singer, Mario Lanza,
Yeah.
that's his name. Yeah. So all these characters were in this world, and those like actors and singers and that, they were known as saints within that world. That they literally deified those individuals and just held them on a higher a higher place. So with their sort of friendship, the parents were initially happy that the pair had bonded together, because they were both sort of loners, essentially. You sort of get that idea with Pauline in the film. She seems very introverted when you're first introduced to her, sort of keeps to herself and that.
Like, I think if it was now, like, Pauline would be like the goth of the school.
Yeah.
Like, she just was very like, I like my own thing.
And you see that she's very, she walks the corridors, her arms folded, head down. And yeah, like you said, Colette, she's just very much her own thing, just doing that. They would constantly spend, practically every waking hour together. Pauline would stay overnight at Juliet's home, and they were more or less inseparable. But then they started fearing that they were becoming a bit too close, because at the time, New Zealand, as I mentioned, New Zealand was sort of a very conservative country at the time. And they were very suspicious of the closeness of their relationship. They feared that it was becoming, sexual in a way. And at the time, homosexuals and lesbians and that, they were deemed, to be that way. You were deemed to have a mental illness. And that only changed, I think, as recently as 1973, which is mad when you think about it, But, during that period, Pauline's mother had taken, Pauline's mother had taken Pauline. Why would she take Juliet? I don't know why. Sorry, wires are crossing there. Yeah, so she took Pauline to see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist more or less said that, I think they may be, forming a homosexual relationship. But at the same time, he reassured her, by saying, "Oh, don't worry, they'll grow out of it."
Yeah, it's just a phase.
Yeah, exactly.
He was like, take up a new hobby or something.
And I was like, I know the girls like writing, they like, they like sculpture, they like being lesbians, but don't worry, the lesbian stuff will go away. And you're just like, what?
It was like, literally, it was like, do you know what? Do you know what'll like shake it out of her? Tennis. Get her into tennis. Should be great, and she could just beat it out of her. And you're like, great, yeah, dead on, yeah, no problem. And her mummy's like, yeah, writing it all down, yeah.
I could make a balls joke there, but I'm not gonna. But anyway, because Juliet had TB, it sort of resurfaced, and she was hospitalized again because of it. And there was a worry, like with Pauline, there's like, oh no, we're going to be separated again. What's going to happen here? But eventually, whenever Juliet got better again, their friendship became even stronger and more tense. It's the whole idea of absence makes the heart grow fonder. Well,
yeah,
that kind of is what happened with the girls. So I suppose we're just winding down. We're getting actually close to murders. I suppose I just finish things off, and then you can get into the good stuff there, Therese. The actual murder itself. I say good stuff. It's actually awful. I shouldn't mock this.
No, definitely, it's actually really grim. So,
But anyway,
you apologize for what you just said, because that's awful.
I know. I'm very sorry.
If Pauline or Juliet are listening to this, or their families,
their families. Yeah, I'm sorry. The pair of them, not so much. But anyway, that's just me and my views towards them. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that a bit more. But anyway, during the summer holidays of 1953, Pauline was no longer allowed to stay overnight at Juliet's because of the fear, after Juliet had gotten better, okay, you're getting too close again. We can't be having that. So, and then furthermore, in 1954, Juliet's parents had separated after Juliet's mother had been caught having an affair with a lodger in their house. And then it was agreed that Juliet would to leave New Zealand with her father to go to live in South Africa. And And that's sort of devastated to do. But Pauline was just so convinced with the idea, right, if you're going to South Africa, well, I'm sure they'll be all right if I just go with you as well. And then obviously both sets of parents were like, no, that's not happening. Like they sort of in their head viewed as, in a weird sort of twist of fate, it's like a way of going, okay, we can finally have them separated and there's no way around that.
Mm-hmm.
So then, that obviously led to both of them being heartbroken over the decision. And that's when they sort of believed it was all Pauline's mother. I didn't even say her name. It's Hanara. That's another name I was struggling with. Yeah. They thought she was the only obstacle standing in the way of them being together. So that's when they began to plot to get rid of her by murdering her. And I think that's probably a good place for you to come in, Therese, because I haven't even mentioned the diaries of Pauline, which sort of outlines this and really gets into the crux of their relationship and that. But you did some great notes on it, so I'll let you sort of go into the diary a wee bit and then the actual murder itself.
I was just thinking before we go in, Colette, at any point, are you creeped out? Are you worried for your sanity? Do you want to tap out yet? How are you feeling? Are you okay?
No, I'm good. I mean, I've watched the entire film, so that was quite creepy and weird in itself. So
yeah, I think it's gonna really get into it as we go into the diary entries and as well closer to the murder. But I just wanted to check in with you and make sure you're okay, because
thank you.
At the end of the day, I don't want anybody, like bad talking that we're bad, they're a guest show, and then nobody else comes on. So we'll have to make sure they're all right.
I'll have to go to the child psychiatrist and get a bit of tennis.
Yeah, get a bit of tennis and you'll be fine. Yeah,
we'll send you where we pack of Werther's originals. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
the murder.
Now to the nitty gritty. So yeah, as Joe had hinted, leading up to this, obviously the relationship was quite suffocating and obsessive between the two. And when you see what's written in the diary that Pauline Parker had, the sort of obsessive suffocation goes a lot more deeper. You could look at their relationship just as like a really intense friendship. Like I'm sure we've literally all had, like, even whenever you're a child, whenever you meet somebody for the first time, you're like, you're my best friend. Like you've met them for like 2 seconds, you're like, yep, we're going to be best friends forever. Everything's great, it's fantastic. Which is what their relationship could have been. But the fact that the two had such a fanatical imagination, along with the things that they wrote about in the diaries, it sort of fueled the fire. So I'll read one of the diary entries just about the fourth world first, which kind of elaborates on the idea of the saints. So as Joe said, they were obsessed with old Hollywood. They often went to the cinema together. They enjoyed an opera singer called Mario Lanza, and to them they were saints. They were the holy god, and they didn't refer to them as like Saint James or Saint Mario. They used pronouns, he, this, him, sort of in the same way that people would refer to Jesus and God as him or the Almighty and different things. So when you're reading whenever I read through the diary entries, if I'm referring to him or he or it's basically Orson Welles, who they didn't even really like because they called him really ugly and they were scared of him. And there's a bit in the film that they're chased by Orson Welles, which we'll talk about, which really scared me. It's really scary. So I feel like I should start like this. June 13th, 1954. Dear Diary, we gave ourselves 2 new saints, Onward, Hale and Buster. Of all people, my God. We had very amusing discussions about God, Christ and the Holy Ghost. In fact, the whole day was very amusing and exciting. We spent a hectic night going through the saints. It was wonderful, heavenly, beautiful and ours. We felt very satisfied indeed. We have now learned this peace of the thing called bliss and the joy of the thing called sin. Love, Pauline. I was adding the love, Pauline, because I imagine that she would do stuff like love, Pauline at the end.
That girl needs tennis.
Yeah, that girl needs a lot of Wimbledon in her life. So we'll go on to some of the diary entries then as the lead up to the murder. For some reason they call murder mortar, which I don't know if it's just like a New Zealand thing, but it's referred to in this as mortar, but I'm just going to say murder.
Okay.
That's what it is.
It's going to be too funny if you say moida every time.
Moida.
We're going to mortar our mother.
Gonna mortar. So this is then a diary entry from the 19th of June, which was 3 days before the murder itself. So again, dear diary, we practically finished our books today, and our main idea for the day was to murder mother. The notion is not a new one, but this time it is a definite plan which we intend to carry out. We have worked it out carefully and are both thrilled by the idea. Naturally, we feel a trifle nervous, but the pleasure of anticipation is great. I shall not write the plan down here, as I shall write it up when we carry it out, I hope. We both spent last night and the one before having a simply wonderful time in every way possible. We also planned a few odd pictures and recast most of the Saints' Christmas. Don't know what that is. We also burnt all our film books this evening. Love, Pauline. Don't know why, and I don't know why they burnt them, because like, not as if there's going to be evidence in them. Like, you'd be burning the diary, not necessarily like the books with Orson Welles in it.
Dear diary, this is the evidence. Please do not read this, Mr. Policeman.
You definitely intend to carry out really in real life.
But the fact that you wrote, I shall not write the plan down here. Yeah. Well, I mean, you blatantly wrote that you're going to murder your mummy. So, fuck, I don't know. So then the last diary entry that I'll read is the day before the murder, which is a bit weird. Just still, it's a bit weird. So this is on the 21st of June in 1954. Dear diary, I rose late and helped mother vigorously this morning. And they don't say Deborah, by the way, it's Deborah. Deborah rang, and we decided to use a brick and a stocking rather than a sandbag. So the couple of days before, she was like, I'm not going to write the plan down here. And now she's basically saying, do you know what? A sandbag would be harder to conceal. Let's put a brick in a stocking.
How would a sandbag even do anything?
Yeah, it would just fit you.
It's like, here, you got sand in your hair.
Don't know. Well, maybe they would like force feed her the sand. I don't know.
No.
Or bury her alive. Who knows?
Go in there.
But yeah, so they went with the good old brick and a stocking trick. So we discussed the murder fully. I feel very keyed up, as though I were planning a surprise party.
Oh.
Mother has fallen in with everything beautifully, and the happy event is to take place tomorrow afternoon. So the next time I write in this diary, Mother will be dead. How odd, yet very pleasing. I have discussed various odd saints with her today, as I thought it would be interesting to have her opinion before she dies. She loathes that and it. I washed my hair this afternoon, and I came to bed at 9:15. Love, Pauline.
Oh, it's exciting for her, you know. It's like the ultimate party.
Do you want to know how excited she is? She washed her hair.
Aye, and I bet it was bloody stinking.
What did they have back in them days? Combs? I don't know.
Just ran their hand through the fingers, you know.
Yeah. And she's lying in bed absolutely delighted, as if she's planning a surprise party, because the thing is, it will be a surprise because her mommy doesn't know she's going to be murdered.
Do you ever picture her like when she's writing them diary entries, like sitting with her hands in her cheeks and she's just jotting away with like her fingers and her legs in the air, just turning her feet back and forth.
Pen in her mouth.
Yeah. It's like she's writing a love letter, even though it's a really horrible, despicable thing that's going to happen. But anyway.
Oh, I spelt murder wrong. Let me just think.
It should be
Wait
murder.
So yeah, jokes aside, I wanted to try and make a bit jokey out of that, because whenever I first read those diary entries, I was kind of like nobody should be studying this in GCSE the way we did with the Diary of Anne Frank. So I hope that it never crosses anybody's English GCSE. So yeah, the night before, she basically writes in her diary and tells everybody what she's going to do. So the next day, 22nd of June, the two girls basically planned the nicest day with their mother. Like, you see it more in the film, and it's not really described so much in the research, but up to this point, Pauline is absolutely seething at her mother, like won't even look at her, won't speak to her, won't talk to her. And then all of a sudden she's like, let's go get some lovely afternoon tea. So they go to Victoria Park in Christchurch, and basically they go have tea. It's a really lovely day. Juliet's apparently leaving for South Africa in a couple of days' time. And after their tea, they decide to go into the park itself and go for a walk. So approximately 130 metres down one of the paths, in a wooded area of the park, which was close to a small wooden bridge, Hulme and Parker bludgeoned I can't say her name. Hornara. They bludgeoned Pauline's mother to death with half a brick enclosed inside an old stocking. After committing the murder, which they had both planned together, the two girls fled, covered in blood, back to the tea house, where they had basically were screaming for the top of their lungs, claiming that Pauline's mother had tripped and fell, and had hit her head. So
fallen onto a brick 20 times somehow.
Fallen onto a brick forward, but she was lying on her back, and they were somehow covered completely in her blood, from, I don't know, picking her up. Who knows? But yeah, so both girls running back screaming, and the two owners of the tea house, they went into the woods with the guards after, and they discovered the body. So major lacerations were found in her head, neck, face, and she had minor injuries on her fingers. And then shortly after, the police had discovered the murder weapon in the nearby woods. So they didn't even really dispose of anything properly. They basically chucked the stocking, ran back, and claimed that Pauline's mother had failed. So within hours, their story that they had told had completely fallen apart. So Joe, do you want to crack on with the trial then?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, like you said, it's very stupid how they thought they were going to get away with this, because I believe it was that night they found Pauline's diary, and once they found that and had a little rummage through that at all
the goosey gander.
Aye. And all the parts where they're like, don't read this, Mr. Policeman, where they actually read it, they found out, okay, this girl had murdered her. And then the subsequent day, they arrested Juliet as well in connection with the crime. So the trial itself was a very sensational affair, with speculation about their possible lesbianism and insanity, which was exacerbated by the media. Who made note of the grotesque evidence, how this woman had been hit in the head more or less 20 plus times with a brick and a stocking. And then they discover, and then as well as that, when excerpts of the diary were made public, that just furthered their interest and intrigue into the case. Like, oh, what the hell is going through this young girl's head that's just writing all this sort of stuff? But then the case itself was reduced. Once that sort of end of things sort of blown over a little bit, and it actually reached the trial, they just basically put the case down to, all right, are these girls bad or are they mad? Like, that's literally how it was, the headlines went, Pauline and Juliet mad or bad. But and a thing to note going into the trial, whenever the thing was going to happen, is that Pauline's mother and father were never actually married. So Pauline's true surname was Rapier, as you'd noted earlier in the podcast. So that sort of plays a role in the actual trial itself. But then, the defense of the case, representing Pauline and Juliet, they tried a plea of not guilty as a reason of insanity. And they tried to use the example of, I love saying this, by the way, it's a French phrase. It's a folie deux, or a madness of two. It's fun to say. I know it's a horrible thing, but it's a fun thing to say.
Leopold and Loeb started off the folie deux. I can't even say it. The madness of two.
Folie deux.
Folie deux.
But then the court obviously shot down the plea, believing that they were not fit enough to stand, believing that they were fit enough to stand trial. And, there was just an excuse for anything.
That they weren't insane. They were
it's like,
fully capable of what they've done, and they knew exactly what they were doing.
Not bad enough. But then, if they were to have been found guilty by reason of insanity, it's in all likelihood they would have been put in a psychiatric hospital indefinitely. And it is also very likely that they would have received prefrontal lobe lobotomies. So the fact that, they weren't even sort of aware of, the severity of the situation they're in, that they were like, oh, no, we'll plead insanity, it'll be fine. You're like, no, you'll not be fine. This is something that's going to like hang over you the rest of your life if you go down this road. But then when you actually looked at the sort of psychology of the girls, there was a great YouTube video and this great YouTube channel by a psychiatrist, a guy called Dr. Todd Grande. And he believes that imposed psychosis was enabled due to the potential separation of the two. So basically, it's sort of common sense in the sense of like, okay, they're going to be separated. So there's a madness to it in that, okay, we need to find a solution to try and stay together. So they go to the extreme of murder.
Yeah.
So in line with folie deux, it is believed that Pauline was psychotic and that her psychosis had transferred to Juliet. And then this was believed to be the case initially, but Pauline had showed, because once the murder had happened, Pauline didn't really show much remorse, whereas Juliet did. Like the severity of the thing, you find out during the trial, like Juliet was like, oh, what have I done? What's going on? Whereas Pauline was like, nah, she deserved it. She tried to separate me and Juliet. Yeah, pretty much. But he does say this is a very tenuous thing at best, as murder related to folie deux is extremely rare. So, with the case itself, on the 28th of August 1954, both girls were convicted by a jury who just took 2.5 hours to deliver their verdict. After the verdict was delivered, it was reported that Parker looked across to Hulme and whispered something, and they both smiled. As they were too young to be considered for the death penalty under New Zealand law at the time, they were convicted and sentenced to be, quote, detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, whatever that means. It's basically like, we'll put you in jail, but nah. It was sort of like that there. Like they just didn't know exactly what to do because something like this never really, happened before in New Zealand.
Not common, yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of the trial. And now we're going to go into sort of this is your life mode here. And we're going to find out where are the girls now. So do you want to go ahead there, Therese, and talk about, what happened to Juliet and Pauline post trial?
Yep, certainly. So as one thing I will mention, like as Joe said, they were sentenced at Her Majesty's pleasure, which again, when I first read it, I was like, the Queen doesn't give two fucks about how long these things are spending. I don't understand why that's the sentence.
Who are they?
But the grim thing was that they only ended up spending 5 years in jail before they were both released. So it was a case of like, obviously, they don't know what to do with them, but clearly their prison sentence, regardless of what age they were, should have been a lot longer than 5 years. Like, it's not as if they just burgled a shop, like it was something so severe. And yes, they mightn't have been able to handle it, and it was a crime that very rarely happened. But I just think it's crazy that they only served 5 years. And as I go on to say, the two of them lived a fairly decent life, unlike Pauline's mother. But yeah, so we'll start with Pauline. After her release, Pauline Parker was given a new identity, and her name is now Hilary Nathan. So when she was released, she spent some time in New Zealand under close surveillance before she was allowed to leave for England. So it's known her whereabouts have only really sort of came about since 1992. It's apparently she's living in a small village of Hoe near Stroud in Kent, and is running a children's horse riding school, because that's good for someone who murdered their mother to be looking after kids. But anyway, she's never openly spoken to the press, but in 1996, through a statement that was released through her sister, she expressed really strong remorse for having killed her mother. Her sister further stated that Pauline committed the most terrible crime and has spent 40 years repaying it by keeping away from people and doing her own little thing. So apparently, because she kept away from the public, that's how she's repaying for murdering her mother. I don't understand that. But yeah, so her sister basically said she's repaid it after hiding away for 40 years and doing her own thing. And after it happened, she's very sorry about it. So let's all pour one out for Pauline, because we're really sad for Pauline, because she's had to hide away for 40 years with their riding school. And apparently it only took her 5 years to realise what she had done. So those 5 years that she spent in prison, that's how long it took for her to realise that she'd murdered her mother. But
yeah, it's like the most sinister Saws babes you've ever heard.
It's literally, it's Saws Hun XOXO. Like,
yeah,
I did it. Sorry.
Aye.
I mean, you'd learn how to ride a bike quicker, but sure. On to the lovely Juliet. So she also had a great time and also was given a new identity, because that's what you do with murderers. You look after them, you give them new identities. So after her release from prison, Juliet went back to England and also lived shortly in the United States, later settling in England, and she became a successful historical detective novelist under her new name, Anne Perry, and for years was basically undetected, and has released loads of books, was earning the dollar bills, until March 2006, when it had came out that she was in fact Juliet Hulme. So she was allowed to live her life, make money, have no qualms, and that was about it. And in an interview in 2006 about the revelation, Juliet was asked about her relationship with Pauline at the time, and she firmly stated that while her relationship with Pauline was extremely obsessive, they were not lesbians and never were. And that was the last sort of interview and any sort of comment that either of them had. So yeah, they committed a horrific murder, spent 5 years in prison, and are now living their both the absolute best lives. So if anybody lives near Kent and knows a Hilary Nathan, you know what to do. And likewise,
Therese.
Whoa, Therese.
Do you mean just like don't put your kids in her writing school?
That's what I meant.
Full disclosure here, we are not entertaining the idea that you hurt or attack this woman in any way. Just realise what she maybe has done. Don't basically, don't climb a clock tower and waiting for her to pass by and take her out with a sniper. Like, Jesus.
Yeah.
It's very sinister the way you said that.
Stop buying Anne Perry's books, and don't send your kids to Hilary Nathan's riding school. In no way do I want any sort of hate or abuse on those individuals. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And I think the great irony behind, their post-prison life, they never made contact with each other afterwards. Not once.
They were never allowed, yeah.
Basically, the last sort of, thing they had with each other was that moment in court where they sort of glanced over at each other, smiled and whispered, and that was it. Ever since 1954, no contact between them at all.
And they both lived shortly in and around Christchurch whenever they were just released.
Mm-hmm.
But it was instructed by the police that they had no contact and like couldn't be within how many yards of each other or whatever.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the main reason that they both also left and went to different countries, because couldn't really survive there. But yeah,
I'm surprised. Which one did you say was Juliet moved to the US for a while?
Yeah, she became Anne
like,
Perry. Yeah,
because normally isn't like, I'm not sure, but normally when you like do really serious crimes, like you're not allowed
to declare it, probably.
Or is it like expunged from their records because it was like a child, like they were in the kids?
Yeah, well,
section.
Juliet had actually described she was actually in a woman's prison. Like it wasn't a juvenile center at all. Like she described,
they just sent her as a 16-year-old or whatever to
out of prison. Yeah.
And like she, in those interviews, she was like, "Oh, the condition." She didn't talk about the actual life in prison. She talked about the conditions. So like, "Oh, it was awful. It's cold. It was this, that, and the other." And you're like, "Well, you did murder someone. So what did you think was going to happen?" But
it could have even been though as well, Colette, the fact that they were given new identities.
Yeah. So they're just you have a new passport, so it's not
because it's the same with the two boys in the James Bulger case. Yeah. I think there was not talk of one of them living in Australia at the minute. And those, I mean, they would have been the same age as the girls, but I would have imagined that once they were given a new identity, then I wouldn't say it was a sponge, but they would have to have some sort of excuse to allow her to be able to travel. Because I mean, something like that you just can't get rid of. You can't just wipe off, like.
No, you can't just wash away something horrible you've done. But anyway, that was the Parker Hulme case itself. So I think we've done enough talking here, Therese. There's 100%. A reason. There's a reason why we've brought Colette along today. We just want to hear her thoughts on the actual film itself. But before we get into the film, we'll just actually get a clip from the film played. So this is from Peter Jackson's 1994 film Heavenly Creatures.
Good morning, Miss Stewart. Sit. Miss Waller, class, this is Juliet Hulme. Juliet is joining us from St. Margaret, and prior to that you spent some time at Queenswood in the Hawke's Bay.
I am actually from England, Miss Stewart.
Of course. Juliet's father is Dr. Hulme, rector of Canterbury College. Juliet has travelled all over the world. I'm sure she's very eager to share her impressions of exotic lands across the seas with the girls of 3A. Well, I'll leave you to it, Miss Waller. Juliet?
You can sit over here, Juliet. We use French names in this class. You can choose your own. Now, irregular verbs in the present subjunctive. Je doutais qu'il vienne.
Excuse me, Miss Waller, you've made a mistake. Je doutais qu'il vienne is in fact the spoken subjunctive.
It is customary to stand when addressing a teacher. Antoinette.
You should have written va.
Oh. I must have copied it incorrectly from my notes.
You don't need to apologize, Miss Waller. I found it frightfully difficult myself until I got the hang of it.
Thank you, Juliet. Open your textbook to page 17.
And that was a clip from the film. So, Colette, we have been yammering on and on and on. So I think the best place to start off with is, what did you think of the film?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this film. It's so unique. I think it's such a unique film. I think, like I said before, this was after Peter Jackson was making B-movie gore horror comedies. And this is just such an interesting story. He wrote it with, who did he write it with? A woman that he's written a lot of stuff with, and it got a.
Walsh.
Is that it? And he did get like an Oscar nomination for like best original screenplay. And I was watching some interviews with Peter Jackson, and he said that he didn't want to focus on the murder. That didn't interest him. It was this dynamic of these two people that individually they're kind of normal. Like, I think this seemed kind of normal. Like, everyone as a teenager is very stupid and obsessed with different things, and they're obsessed with like pop stars of the time and actors of the time. But these two people coming together at this time, having these experiences, and it just they egg each other on, and it just leads to both of them getting so much more obsessive and unhealthy. And I don't know about the lesbian aspect of it. Like, there is a little bit of that in the film. There's not a lot. And I don't know what you think. I don't know whether that was actually true, or that's just something that kind of was in the media about it. Because you can, like, I know Therese is saying, like, you can, like, when you're younger, like, have friends, and they're such kind of strong friendships, like best friends kind of thing. So I don't know about that, but the way that the film is shot is fantastic, because it's this 1950s New Zealand, quite conservative. They go to this all-girls school, looks like absolute but nightmare. Then it does look like a nightmare, and their home lives very kind of boring, and but then they go into the fourth world, and that's where you can see, like, oh, this is how they picked this guy to direct Lord of the Rings, because he's so good at melding a really normal life with this really fantastical fourth world where sculptures come to life, like these beautiful hills, rainbows, and then they go into this fourth world. It's so long. I think that films, it's not that long, but it's like the film, so much stuff happens in the film. By the time like the murder comes along at the end, I was like, oh my god, they're gonna actually murder. Like, I forgot that was gonna happen. Like, I wasn't actually thinking of it. And I think like the most chilling thing, like Therese and you mentioned, they go up to the tea house and they're having their little scones and tea with the mother. And then the mom is kind of like, oh, geez, I won't have another one. And then Pauline's like, go on, treat yourself, Mom. You deserve to have another cake.
Because I've written in my diary, it'll be your last.
It'll be your last.
And then, because her mom said, she said, oh, I'm trying to watch my weight or something like that. And she says that line, oh, you deserve to have another one. And then she looks at Juliet and she's like,
like, very weird.
We bitches, like,
it's so funny. And it, like, some of it's dark, but it's very funny. Like, there's lots of really funny parts in it. Like, the two of them are such weirdos about, like, they both have these diseases, like the sicknesses, and you can see how they were obviously on their own a lot of their childhood. So, they would have, you're lying in a hospital bed, you kind of start thinking, daydreaming, like, you can see how they ended up like that. And I think it was like, was it Juliet or someone that was like, oh, the best people have lung and bone disease, like, really greatest. Like, just, they're so funny. But yeah, what did you guys think? Because I'm so interested to see like what your impressions were like from watching it.
You going ahead there, Therese? What do you think?
So I knew, I hadn't seen the film, but I knew a lot about the case. I'm just listening to podcasts, as I always do, and I wondered how, as you like had pointed at, Colette, like how someone like Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings god, would direct a crime film like this. And you would imagine that it would have some sort of element of fantasy with it. But those bits are some of the best, and I think they're a lot darker than the actual murder itself. Like the scenes where the sculptures that they create for this fourth world come alive, and basically commit, all of the dark feelings that the two girls want. There's one scene that I just think is just so weird, and it kind of reminds me of Return to Oz, with the sort of rock and like stone people, is when they're in a courtyard, and Gina and Deborah are both there, and then there's this there's a guy called, is it Gerard or Jared or something like that? I think maybe it's Gerard, but he's like the heartthrob in the fourth world, and they're all dancing with him, and it's just these weird clay people, and to an onlooker that would be frightening, but to the girls it's like the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, and the two of them are just so infatuated with it. And in that world they're both queens, and why in the sort of real world they're not bullied, they're not harmed by other people. Yes, they have extremely awful illnesses, and their family life isn't great either. Like, Juliet's parents really don't care about her.
And they constantly just leave her. They're just like, bye. Like, we're moving to another country.
They're happy to just send her off to South Africa because it apparently will help her because the weather's better. And for Pauline as well, regardless of her family status, she lives in a B&B, and there's so many people coming in and out of that house that she has to almost open herself to. And a girl, and sort of the only young female in that house, like she's open, it's quite dangerous as well. So the two of them are quite isolated. But what I think confused me about the film was how the dynamics were different than how they were in real life. So from any of the research, Pauline to me seemed to be the full driving force, whereas in the film it was Juliet. So Kate Winslet's character was the one who was really influencing Pauline and sort of brought her into these ideas of the fourth world and this fantasy life. Whereas in real life, and especially there's a website that Joe sent, and you can Google as well, it just has all of the diary entries uploaded, and when you read parts of the diary, everything is Pauline. She creates the fourth world, she creates the saints, the unicorns, the ideas, the names, and is almost sort of the person that coaxes Juliet along. So I don't know what the reasoning behind that change would have been. I know this was Kate Winslet's sort of feature debut, so maybe they wanted to have her be more of the focus, but it was also Melanie Linsky's first role as well, so I couldn't find anything as to why that sort of shift happened, but if you were sort of being true to the crime itself, would be something that people would question. But looking at it sort of on a whole, the murder is quite a small part of the madness. It's everything else leading up to it, really.
Well, in terms of what I sort of thought of it, I did mention briefly, I'd seen it in bits and pieces when I was younger, so, rewatched it as a whole there only a few days ago, and I think what you said, Colette, about, the fantasy elements of the film is what Jackson really does well. The film itself, as grounded in reality as it is, it's because of that grounded nature of it that the fantasy elements can just be brought in and they just work seamlessly throughout. Like, even elements of the fourth world seep into reality. Like, I'm just thinking when Juliet's in hospital again, and it's a priest or reverend who's just trying to preach to her about God, and then all of a sudden one of the clay figures appears behind the priest and goes to murder him to her delight and stuff like that there. I thought that worked really well. And then even, I think you touched upon it, I don't think we've talked about it properly yet, the Orson Welles scene. The two girls go to see it's brilliantly done. They go to see The Third Man in the cinema, and then they come out, but they previously mentioned, I think it was Juliet Yeah, it was Pauline's picture, and Juliet took it off. She's like, "Oh, he's the most hideous man ever." And poor Orson, like. So then they take it and she chucks it in the river, and then later he comes back to haunt them in a way, and that's actually really well done. The fact that he was just this black and white figure, and, his character of Harry Lyman, the third man, and he's stalking them, from the cinema to their home, and then even in and around their home. It's creepy, but yet really effective at just, showing how their imaginations have just spiraled completely out of control, that they actually can see this in front of them. I don't think we really touched on the performances, but I thought both girls are absolutely brilliant. Like, when you look at pictures of Pauline and Juliet, it's actually quite striking how close they are, particularly Pauline, Melanie Linsky. She, I talked about earlier, the folded arms and the, scowl on her face, and that, it's just, spot on. And I believe they cast her after just going through a couple of schools around New Zealand. They were like, we don't know who to get for Pauline. It's that story, who are we going to cast in this role? And they found her, and luckily you did, because she's just fantastic in it. And I think, in what you were saying, Therese, about the idea of why they switched from Pauline being the control one to Juliet, I think that's from their sort of storytelling point of view, where they wanted to bring an outside influence to sort of influence Pauline in her life, because Pauline was very much a sort of, she was stuck in her way of being. She just didn't know where things were going in life. She was on her own. She's very introverted. Yet this, sort of beam of light, this, sort of angelic figure in Juliet comes into her life, changes everything completely, and, that sort of, blossoms in their friendship and that there. Yeah. So I think that's maybe the reasoning behind it. It's just sort of to show how, okay, this outside influence can influence, me and behaviors and that there.
I know all of the like narration in the film is Pauline, and it's like from her diaries. And then I read up that it was literally what you read. I recognized it from the film. So Pauline does have like, she's almost, like you said, Joe, like the backbone of the film, and then Juliet kind of comes in and mixes things up.
Stars a pot.
Just like whispers in her ear in a way. It's like, you know what might not be a bad idea. You see her mad, just kind of get rid of her, But I think we didn't really go into too much detail, but the murder itself, I think that's, for me, that's the standout moment of the film, in terms of the build-up towards
it. Quite tense.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's literally the moment Juliet... it's from the moment Juliet goes to Pauline's house, you just know, oh, here we go. This is it. Because that's when the little things start to happen. There's little like moments where I think it's Pauline's mother's putting like sausage rolls in the oven, and you're like, are they actually going to do it now? It's like, is it going to change?
They're standing behind her.
Yeah. And then it's the purse itself. It's got the brick, and it's sort of like, maybe we'll just take that, because the mother actually holds the purse with, the thing that's going to kill her in it. And then you get to the, you just talked about the scene at the tea kiosk, and that was just brilliantly done, and it's just so sinister in the way she was just like, oh no, you have that. It's as if to say, it's like, oh, well, it's the last wee treat for you before we off you.
It's like the classic element in film when the audience has been basically told what's going to happen, and you're just sitting there going, oh my god, we know, and like she hasn't a clue. There's nothing we can do about it.
It's very Hitchcock, like, there's a bomb on the bus, and there's a bomb on the bus, but nobody else in the film knows there's a bomb on the bus. That idea. And so then when they go down the pathway, you still think in the back of your head, right, maybe it doesn't go down this way. And one thing I actually will say about Peter Jackson, I'm very glad he did it, is when the murder itself happens, as brutal as it is, he shows a few blows, but they're very quick cut edits. Yeah. So I think that actually makes it more effective in a way as well, because you actually wince and you like shake at every blow, but it doesn't linger in it, because like in real life there's something like 20 blows in the film. They show like 5. And then it's the 2 girls running away. And that's another aspect of the film, just before we go any further. I love the beginning. It's like the nice sort of 1950s newsreel footage of New Zealand. This isn't Christchurch, and this is what people do here. And then cut straight away to the 2 girls running away in the after. Yeah, so you're like, okay, so it's not this little paradise that you've built it up to be. It is something worse. But Yeah, that's sort of my general thinking around the film. Any other sort of thoughts on it, Colette, or anything?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, what did you? Because I was thinking about, do you think it was kind of fair to the two girls in it? Like, obviously the murder is so awful, and then they only get 5 years. Like, they're so lucky they were under 18 or whatever. But during the film, you do see how they go into this fantasy world to kind of protect themselves. Like, Juliet's been like abandoned by her parents so much. And then there's a really kind of affecting scene where Pauline, one of the lodgers that are staying in the house, he has sex with her, and she just almost disassociates and goes off into her fantasy world. And it's quite horrible, but you can see her kind of protecting herself by living in this world. And like, did they really just, were they so far into that world that they just didn't understand what they were doing? And like 5 years later, Pauline then is like, oh my God, I've killed my mother. And it made me think of the Slender Man killings and stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of a similar thing. So yeah.
I think, I don't know if you can put it down to a case of nature versus nurture, because while they both had very different backgrounds and tough childhoods as well, like, I wouldn't say as equally that they were like bad childhoods either. Like, you know, when you look at Juliet, yes, her parents sent her to the likes of South Africa, but if they were in that level of wealth, you know, in their mind, that's the best thing that they can do for their daughter, was to send her to the likes of South Africa. And you know, in the scenes in the film where they're at Pauline's house and they're around the dinner table, like, her dad has a real interest in her, and her granny and her mummy, and you know, they're always suggesting stuff to do with her and things like that. And again, the incident with Pauline and the lodger is awful, because he initially tries to sexually assault her, and then the dad walks in and suspects that it's been her all along. And then they soon go into a relationship which I think Pauline sort of went down as a revolt against her parents, not because she necessarily wanted to. But I think, to your point, Kat, where they were so into that world, I'd say they were so into it to the point where in that world, murdering somebody makes sense, because in a fantasy world it happens all the time. Like, when you look at like medieval stories, you know, like Romeo and Juliet, that is like a romantic tragedy, and the only way the two can sort of have any sort of relationship with each other is if they both kill each other. So I would say it was a mixture of their home life and sort of any of culture and arts that they were taken in, but at the same time, I don't think they sort of had like the guidance of like the real guidance of their parents to be able to go, girls, step back. Like, they immediately jumped, as you said, to the bandwagon that they were both in a relationship, like a romantic relationship, but they might not necessarily have been. And while that speaks volumes of the time, that they might have just had mental illness that was undiagnosed, and that had a real big stigma, and still does to this day, that they didn't have the proper guidance from their family, from doctors, and things just sort of spiraled. But while those things are awful, I still just can't feel sorry for them. Like, you know, they did what they did. And yes, they do have remorse, but at the same time, they could have easily just went about their life and not murdered her mother. You know, I think there's a lot of what ifs because of the age of the girls, and then because of the era that had happened as well. What do you think, Joe?
See, that's the thing. When you talk about mental illness, you know, when Pauline's taken to a psychiatrist, he's just so obsessed and focused on the idea of like, oh, it's because she's lesbian potentially. That's the thing that's making her be so overly imaginative, and everything that's sort of going wrong with her in terms of her mood and everything. It stems from that. It doesn't stem from the fact that she could potentially, like you say, have some sort of mental illness that has been completely undiagnosed.
Yeah, it could be something that's like stemmed from her illness with
Trauma.
her legs. Yeah. Trauma, like PTSD, pure and simple PTSD.
Because the treatments themselves, when you research them, they're described as being extremely painful, and then you actually see the aftermath in the film. The scars on her leg. Yeah. How painful that must have been for a child, and then obviously that's a sort of trauma that is unaddressed, and just given the conservative nature of New Zealand and how they approached lesbianism and homosexuality in general, they just sort of that's the quick fix answer. It's that's it. And I think as well that they do have some sort of repressed, sort of feelings towards each other, and that comes out in the scene, where they talk about, oh, these are how our characters made love to each other. So they're acting upon maybe their feelings through their characters that they've created.
Yeah.
Because I think in Pauline's diary entry, she does suggest that they did have some sort of sexual relationship.
Okay. I didn't know. I just wasn't sure.
No, because I wasn't sure either. And then when I actually, looked up a bit of more information, there is a little snippet on it. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it sort of infers that, but it's open for interpretation.
Yeah, because it's hard because they're so over the top and romantic.
Yeah, it could mean anything. It could literally mean anything. They could have shared a scone.
Exactly, and then that's exactly, and then Peter Jackson from Walsh is like, oh, the shirt's gone. Okay, they're definitely lesbian. Let's have a lesbian scene here, and you're like, that's maybe not the case. It's just the nature of the way she read it, and especially whenever, I think it is Anne Perry who came out in her interview and said, oh no, we didn't have that kind of relationship. We were just
obsessed with each other.
Obsessed, yes. So I think in general the film, it, in terms of making you sympathize with the two characters, I think it's important that they do that in terms of a film, because if you don't sympathize with either of them in any way, shape, or form, the film's going to be a slog, and you're like, I hate these two girls. I just want
no driving force.
Exactly. If you're, there's nothing worse than sitting watching it going, there's nothing to cling on to these characters. I hate them, and they're going to do this awful act, and they just won't feel anything for them. I think the turning point, I'm kind of with Colette in that there. I did feel sympathetic with them, because the smart trick in the script, I think, is to make you forget what's going to happen. If you just think, oh, they're two lonely girls and they've managed to come together and create this magical world together. They're weirdos. Yeah, there's no debating that there, but sure, it wasn't everyone.
It's not a crime.
Exactly, it's not a crime. I'm sure we all were at some stage, and to an extent, I know I still am.
Definitely still am.
And like you said, it's not a crime. It's just a perfectly normal thing people have growing up. But then the turning point for me is the second the brick goes in the stock, and that's when it's happening. It's gonna happen. As much as you think kind of want to go, no.
Someone is gonna, like, up until that point, someone's gonna be like, oh, we're not gonna actually do that. Like, let's go listen, watch this movie. Like it.
No.
And then if it was just one of them, you kind of think, well, maybe if it was just one of them, they wouldn't have gone through with it. But because the two of them
take turns,
they didn't want to disappoint the other one now that they had made this plan, and like, was this real? Like, were they both serious about this plan?
Or did, as you said, did they just not want to let each other down, or were they trying to one up each other? Who really knows? At the end of the day, it was a really horrific crime. That, again, it's just crazy that they only spent 5 years for. They're both out living their lives, and unfortunately Pauline's mother didn't get to live the rest of her life.
And you don't see anything in it after the murder. So you don't see like what their father thought about it, or
that
sort of thing as well.
Well, clearly, like from Pauline's end of things, her sister seems to be okay with it in a way. Well, not okay, like she's sort of made peace with it.
Yeah, she's dealt with
Because,
it.
whereas Juliet, you don't really hear anything. But there's not an interesting aspect. I don't think you mentioned, Therese, both of them turned to religion, in their post-jail lives. Like Pauline, upon moving to England, she became a Catholic. And Anne, in her brief stint in America, she became a Mormon.
Yeah.
And I think it's in the idea of Mormonism, you can sort of, I don't know if it is the right way of putting it, sort of buy your way into heaven by doing good things.
Deeds, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's 100%, so I'm sorry if I'm, generalizing Mormons out there. But, part of me thinks, is that her way of trying to get absolution for what she done, by doing this here? But the funny thing about the end of the film, it's basically the separation of the two, through that sort of fantasy of Juliet on the boat being taken away, because they always had, what was a sort of precursor to that is that they're both going to be in a boat and they're both going to move away with Juliet's parents and everything's going to be happy and fantastic. But then as soon as the verdict's delivered, that's where the film ends. Juliet's taken away in the boat and Pauline sits watching on. And James Cameron saw that footage and decided, Kate Winslet, Titanic.
She looks great at the front of a boat. Here we go. Ding, ding, ding.
But no, in all seriousness, I thought that was a good way to end it. And then obviously there's the post-film sort of credits where they mention what happened next. But you don't actually see the aftermath of it all. And I suppose from a film point of view, epilogues don't always really work for me. Anyway,
the two of them together is what's interesting in that relationship and everything leading up to this. And after that, it's interesting to look up on Wikipedia, but yeah, the film is really just those two people and how they play off each other. And
it's probably gives a lot more respect for the family for the fallout as well, not sort of dwell on whatever else happened after.
I did think it was like how they handled the murder scene was, I mean, it's still, you wouldn't be watching it if you were in that family, but it was relatively respectful, I think.
Oh yeah,
definitely. It wasn't gory. It was
No. It wasn't like a Quentin Tarantino style.
No,
which we all know would have been a lot worse, probably.
No, and that's what I mean. Coming from Peter Jackson, who his previous film Brain Dead was one of the most bloody films I've ever seen in my life, and a scene that involves zombies and lawnmowers. But for him to have done something this here, it is a complete 180 in terms of his tone in that there. You do see elements of his actual work in that there, in terms of the way the camera moves and stuff like that there, but it fits tonally with the story he's trying to tell.
Yeah. And it's a great cult film as well. Even aside from having any interest in true crime or the story itself, as you've mentioned, Colette, it's a really interesting sort of medium between the likes of the B movies and Lord of the Rings to see what else Peter Jackson did, and taken on a genre that he probably wouldn't take on, and I don't think he has, but correct me if I'm wrong, and how he handled it really, really well. And again, it received an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay, so it obviously did something right.
But does anyone else got any sort of thoughts on Heavenly Creatures or stuff like that? No? Okay. Well, that's probably a good place to sort of end things off here. So firstly, thanks very much for joining us this evening, Colette. I hope Therese didn't traumatize you too much with Pauline's diary entries.
Pauline's diaries, yeah. I might go off and read a bit more in Pauline's diaries.
Oh, of course.
Yes, they are quite interesting, to be fair. Like when I read them the other day,
fascinating.
I thought it was a bit weird, but given the circumstance, it was like, God, this
research.
This girl, this girl needed some help.
And she didn't get it.
No, she did not.
Didn't get those tennis lessons.
No,
just never got them.
She could have been up there with Venus and Serena Williams, but instead she had to kill her mother with a brick. I know I need to stop doing that. That poor woman died, and I'm making light.
I was about to make a joke about how she must have had a good swing, but that's awful.
Oh, okay.
Well.
No, you're the bad guy now. That's all right then. Okay, so
bad.
Therese is a monster. I'm a saint. But anyway, yes, thanks very much for joining us, Colette. And thank you very much, as per usual, Therese, joining me in our journey into murder and mayhem. Just a few notes, please, visit our website at BanterFlix.com. We have a Patreon there, so if you like what you hear here, as well as some of our various other pods, including the main one, We Need to Talk About Movies. I believe there's a cosplay sort of spin-off pod as well, and I'm sure there's others, but my mind has gone blank. Therese, can you help me out here if there's any other sort of spin-off ones?
On the Patreon, there's also the monthly ramble, and we also broadcast the teen quiz that we've done. So we've done 2 so far, and Joe has won both, much to me and Colette's anger. You can also find our Twitter and Instagram, which are both at BanterFlix, and we're also on Facebook as well. So
another thing, the Disney retrospective pod series that's still ongoing, hosted by Victoria. Almost forgot that, couldn't do that, but yes, all those other lovely things that you were talking about too, Therese.
So as always, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe, and also get onto the Patreon as well, because there is going to be a few more things available as time goes on, sort of members only extras and different things like that, and any sort of support that we get is great. So thanks very much. I think that's all we have really to say for today.
So yes, have a good day, everyone. And if you ever are compelled to murder a parent because you have an intense friendship, don't do it. Just don't do it.
Or don't write about it either.
Yeah,
don't write.
Don't put
and
it
if
there.
you do it, don't incriminate yourself. But anyway, thanks very much, everyone. And this has been another episode of Crime Scene to Screen. Bye-bye.